Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're super happy to have you at this 30 by 30 webinar. This is probably the one I'm most excited about for the whole year. I'm Tanya Meisenholder, the Director of Gender Equity, and I currently oversee the 30 by 30 initiative to advance women in policing. Today we have a panel of folks who are going to be holding a conversation with Chief Alice White from Golden Valley. First, we have Maureen, aka McGough, the co-founder of 30 by 30 and partner extraordinaire. So happy that you're able to join us today. Mo has been with 30 by 30 since inception, and she currently works at the University of South Carolina in their Excellence in Police Training program. Ganesha Martin, fantastic person from Mark 43, huge supporter of women in policing and 30 by 30 with a wealth of experience in policing and primarily centered around dealing with the community and in issues that affect police trust and any number of other factors. Chief White, we are so happy to see you. Mo's going to get a bit of the background in a minute, but Chief White has been with 30 by 30 for some time. She was initially in the Minneapolis Police Department when we filmed Women in Blue. And she was a sergeant at the time, and now she is the assistant chief at Golden Valley. So today we're going to spend some time talking about how she has adjusted, how she has grown, what that has looked like for her, and the takeaways that we have for all of you in the audience. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. As a reminder, we are recording this. It will be up on our website in about a week, so you can review it then if you like. If you can, please remember to keep your phones muted so that we don't have any unnecessary conversations recorded. We'd love to see your faces if you're so inclined. If not, we completely understand. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat box or raise your hand and we will get to them as quickly as we can. Ganesha, we'll see how the time is going in terms of whether we'll take those questions along the way or we'll wait till the end. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to turn it over to Mo. And once again, just thank you all for being here today at this 30 by 30 webinar with Alice White.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Tanya, and echoing Tanya's thanks both to Ganesha and Chief White. So excited that you all are able to make the time to be in community with us today. If you've been with 30 by 30 for a while, you know that we hosted 7 different regional listening sessions across the country over the last few years. And we did that because of sort of the brilliance and foresight of Ganesha Martin. So one of the things that Ganesha did is she's been a thought partner for us from the very beginning. And she really sort of held us to account and said, you cannot possibly build this, especially on a national scale, if you're not doing it on the lived experiences of the women who are already in the profession. It was a point well taken. We were lucky that Ganesha was actually running some impact initiatives for the Women in Blue documentary at the time. And we were able to create a partnership between Ganesha's work with Mark 43, with the Women in Blue documentary, and within 30 by 30. So what we did is we went to those 7 different regions. We went with, I think, over 450 women from across the country and 30 by 30 and non-30 by 30 participating agencies. And we used clips from Women in Blue to really prompt the officers in the audience to think about their own experience and whether or not it was reflected in the Women in Blue documentary. For those of you who maybe haven't seen the documentary, I couldn't recommend it highly enough. As Tanya mentioned, it follows the lives of several women in the Minneapolis Police Department. And it is a very, I think, authentic and honest look at what it is to be a woman in policing. There's some really beautiful things that are highlighted, especially from how Chief White treats her community. It's sort of like a masterclass in procedural justice. And then there's some other things that are hard to watch, some blatant disrespect, double standards, and the kinds of things that we all are fighting against every day. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. If you can't access it, email us. We have a relationship with the director and we can get you access if you can't. But I'm gonna go ahead and turn things over to Ganesha and Chief White for the discussion that we've all been waiting for. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Mo. And it is so good to be here with you, Chief, and everyone on the call. As Mo was talking, it just made me think about how this film in so many ways has brought women across the country together. A funny kind of story. I've been doing this impact work with this film for, I don't know, 5, 6 years, I don't know, a long time. And it wasn't until a couple of months ago that I was doing some work in Golden Valley, and here comes Chief through the door, and we finally got to hug and talk, and like we've been at the hip with each other since then. And that just happened so much in this work. So happy that you're here with us today. How are you feeling today?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm feeling really well. Thank
Okay.
you.
Good, good, good. I'm so excited about this. And I was thinking, particularly, we're going to get to that you're the first, in a lot of different ways in this profession. And I've talked to a lot of women who have been the first chief, the first sergeant, the first lieutenant, and while we celebrate that, they often are like, it's hard. It's hard. And so then I think about not only you being the first in that way, but then having the documentary and you're spotlighted and now people are seeing it and people are having thoughts about it. Talk to us a little bit about your decision to even be in the documentary and what it was like, for you after that, inside the department.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I want to thank 30 by 30 for having me and giving me this platform to talk to other women in law enforcement or just other women in general. This is my honor to be here. So thank you. When Deirdre Fishel came to the city of Minneapolis and met with as many women officers as at the time Chief Janae Harto could get in a room. I was immediately intrigued. I had previously been in a book called Chicks with Guns, and I loved to be able to show that to my daughters. I have 3 daughters. And immediately I thought, what a better way to be able to show my daughters and my family for generations, like what my legacy has looked like. So immediately, selfishly, I thought, well, I'm going to do this for my children because this is going to be something that will live forever. My children can see it, my grandchildren can see it, and they can form their opinion about what their mom, their grandma's professional career has looked like. It wasn't Deirdre didn't decide immediately who would be in the film. And I'm an outgoing, loud, energetic person. So I'm in the room and I'm chit-chatting with everybody because how often in Minneapolis do we get a bunch of women together in a room?
Yeah.
So I hadn't seen people. At the time, the department's like 900 people. So you don't see people. You can go years without seeing people. So I think there was something about my charismatic personality that Deirdre was like, I want her to be in this documentary. And that started 2 years of a camera crew, 2.5 years of a camera crew following me and my family around.
Yeah, it makes me think there's a woman, she's a deputy commissioner in Baltimore who also was in a film that I suggested that she be in. And there was a lot of people that were excited, but there were a lot of people who were not excited about cameras, being in the department and that sort of stuff, kind of exposing things. How did that work?
For me, I was always super respectful of people and like how their boundaries were with having the film crew. So I always asked people, and then also you have to have people sign a release. So ironically, stereotypically cops say, oh, we don't like to be on the camera, we don't want to do the interviews. But it was pretty apparent that people liked, showing out for the camera and being a part of the film. Initially, there was hesitance, but a lot of people were really comfortable being on the film. And If you've seen it, it was really important to me that, and I'm grateful that Deirdre allowed for me to pull in the community and be a part of it. Like the group and the coffee shop, those are my people who I met with every week. And I wanted to really show, what it was like in the day of the life of a sworn officer. And Sammy, rest his soul, from Avenue Eatery, he passed away. I pulled him in the film because as one of the only Black owned coffee shops in the city of Minneapolis and a staple on West Broadway, which is right in the middle of all the violent crime that occurs in Minneapolis, I thought it was extremely important for him to be a part of the film. So people, honestly, I think secretly liked it.
Yeah, I think people like to tell their story, and they like to be heard, and it makes me think, like, what even got you into policing? Like, how did your journey start into policing?
So an uncle of mine was a Minneapolis police officer, and so that was the first time I had really saw someone that I knew and loved and respected as an officer. And so from a very young age, I think that seed was planted in my head, probably around 5. And then as I grew up in the city of Minneapolis, I went to Minneapolis public schools, and I was a product of Minneapolis streets. I was a teenager. I grew up in the era of Murderapolis, and my friends and I had many encounters with the Minneapolis Police Department. And from like a teenager, I knew like this is the career I have to get into because we need someone who represents us to be a part of this department so we can have some trust of Minneapolis Police Department, of law enforcement, because that didn't exist when I was growing up.
And what was it like? Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, what was it like when you first came onto the department?
So I was super proud. I was like telling everybody. And when I first started, I was a community service officer, so I wasn't a sworn officer. And just even my association with the Minneapolis Police Department, I lost some friends. Like I said, I was a product of Minneapolis. And so not all my friends were law-abiding citizens. And to have their homegirl be a part of at the time it felt like the enemy and be a part of the police department, people didn't want to associate with me. And I think that was good. I honestly believe God, leads your path. Had I maintained those relationships at that time, that goes against, the very ethics of law enforcement. So I think people got removed from my life intentionally so I could flourish in this career. And things have come full circle. Now all those same guys and girls are school bus drivers and football coaches and law-abiding citizens. But as kids growing up, you're a product of your environment. And so it wasn't well received by everyone. My brother seriously tried to convince me not to go into law enforcement. I had a very successful business. I was a massage therapist and I was making good money, and he was really trying to encourage me, just move down to Atlanta, open up a business. And but the passion that I had to be in law enforcement, I knew my spirit wasn't going to let me not do it.
And how was it for you in the department? Where did you see women? Did you see women, Black women that looked like you? What was that experience for you?
So when I first, it was one Black woman, Valerie Worster. She was in the front office. And so she was a deputy chief at the time. And I saw her, and that seeing someone in that role, she retired very shortly after I got on the department. That mattered, even for that short amount of time. Seeing her, it let me know that this department, something like that is possible. Had I not seen that, I might not have known all the possibilities. So like I said, when I started as a community service officer, I didn't really see a lot of women, Black women. I don't know Minneapolis has ever had more than 7 Black women on the department at one time. I might be being generous by saying that. luckily for me, starting out as a CSO, my mentor, Sergeant Jan Calloway, she ended up being the supervisor of the community service officer position or of the unit. And she's a Black woman, and she definitely has guided my career. She, took an interest in seeing me advance and helped mentor me to where I am right now.
Yeah, you were a brand new sergeant, I think, at the time that Women in Blue was filmed. Tell us about that experience. And I don't know if I've been quoting this right, but I said you were the first Black female sergeant in the, yeah, and I think you told me that was not right, but in my head, when I talk to everybody, that's what I say. So let's get the record straight. But tell us about that experience.
I'm not the first Black female sergeant in the Minneapolis Police Department. I am the first Black female assistant chief at the city of Golden Valley. And prior to Sheriff DeWanna Witt being appointed sheriff, I'm the highest Black female in the state of Minnesota for any police municipality. And that's not something I necessarily say proudly, it's just a fact. And one of my mentors, she told me a long time ago, Alice, you're going to be first a lot. Just make sure you're not last. And so since, I've been in this role, I have hired other Black women for the department. And this department is more diverse than it ever has been. And it's because I believe people see what they can be.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we have women who are joined this conversation who can relate to you. They've been the first, they may still be the only, but we also have women that join these conversations looking to, promote to sergeant, promote to lieutenant. We saw in the film, and it's interesting, some people, well, no, most people interpreted the roll call scene as they were being disrespectful. So talk to us about what it was like for you to promote to sergeant, to be sergeant, and being in those rooms, in the roll call rooms, trying to command the respect that you deserved, but now was not always given.
Yeah, so first, that scene, I never anticipated it to be so controversial and so many people to have an opinion about it. So I want to say not everyone has the luxury of growing up on camera. And I'm grateful for that scene because now we have something to talk about, something that matters. We can have a serious conversation and we have a visual to look at and see personal and professional growth. So
I'm so sorry to, Chief, I'm so sorry to interrupt. This is Mo. Do you mind describing the scene, or Ganesha? I'm realizing there's some people on the call who might not have seen it.
So you know what I'll do? I'll describe it from my perspective.
Okay.
And what other women, said in the listening sessions across the country, and then you describe it from your perspective, right?
Okay.
Chief White comes in. She pretty much is, talking about the detail, what needs to happen on the shift that day, reviewing what happened, kind of like, I think the night before. And a lot of women, first of all, like the people were like slouch, it's roll call, but still they're just kind of like slouch, and some of them kind of like talking to each other, not really listening. And then, she gives, and she's trying to be a boss, but an understanding type of boss, right? And she asked about, checking, I want to say it was the library or something like that. And one of the guys makes a joke, right? And a lot of people thought that was disrespectful. And then the thing that got a lot of conversation was when Chief, there was like a little mini interview after that scene. And she basically talked about, that cops have a kind of, you didn't use the word dirty, but, a edgy sense of humor, and that she felt like in order to kind of have a camaraderie, you got to let them kind of joke around sometimes, and if it gets too edgy or whatever, she'll excuse herself. And so there were lots of feelings and thoughts around that. So why don't Chief tell us from your perspective about that scene?
So from my perspective, I'm in a roll call room supervising people who have like 10 years more experience than me. So they've been on, with the department longer, and they've been working in that precinct, which is the highest violent crime in the state, for their entire career. And so I'm coming in with cameras. Automatically, that is a uncomfortable, like, and I don't want to say embarrassing, but it was a new experience, right? So I don't feel like anyone was being like their true, genuine self, because it was awkward. It was awkward. And, you have to remember, these are cameras filming while I'm doing roll call. And
Yeah.
so, and I was a newer sergeant, and I always prided myself on being professional, but I also was a cop's cop, quote unquote. So I grew up with boys, and I was used to that kind of conversation, and I could talk smack with the boys just as good. And I personally wasn't uncomfortable. So I personally, at that time, didn't think anything of it until I started hearing, like, you're a role model, you're a woman, you stand for all of us. And some of us aren't comfortable with that. And why would you allow men to hold the space in that manner? And why wouldn't you expect more professionalism from them? And so as a new sergeant, and hearing that feedback, and then that's when I started researching. That's when I started reading how women truly affect law enforcement. Now, remember, I got into this film thinking I'm going to do this for the legacy of my family, not necessarily considering the foundational goals of this film.
Yeah.
And that, and after getting feedback from my oldest daughter, Karma, and she said, Mom, how could you do that? When you said, I just leave the room, I was embarrassed. I was mortified. How could you? And my kids held me accountable. And
Wow.
I was like, that was wrong. That was completely wrong. But not everyone has the luxury of growing up on camera. I've had that luxury.
Yeah.
Today, I would never allow that to happen. Today, I am accountable to all of the women in law enforcement. And I don't think today anyone would have the nerve to behave like that in a roll call that I'm hosting. But I mean, that was 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm extremely proud of my professional growth. And I'm also extremely proud that people, the world, got to witness it, because I said, we got something to talk about now.
And it's so I love, first of all, I know that part about your daughter. I love the way that you told that story. But we have these situations all the time where they're joking, they're saying, I was out with some chiefs last night, and I'm like, they get cigars in hands, bourbon in hand, and then I'm gonna be the person like, guys, but I have figured out a way to do what I need to do so that I feel safe, protected, and especially if there's young women around me. Like, I get super protective, but as women, in in life in general, but in law enforcement in particular, we sometimes have to find ourselves in these situations where we have to navigate that. And there was even the woman in the film who her response pretty much was, I don't take no shit, and you could tell she was kind of trying to pump her chest out, and stuff like that. And but I think when we have people who support us, who call us out in love, And we can work through these things. We can talk through these things. We are not shamed. Like, this is what I love about 30 by 30, because we can't act like this stuff is easy, right? I mean, it's difficult. So now I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I bet you if I asked for a poll, all the women on here were like, I had to deal with that yesterday. I dealt with that 5 minutes ago. But yeah, and also how you said you carry yourself, right? So sometimes now you don't even have to say, fellas, get yourself together. It's just your command presence that it's like, yeah, she's not the one. She's not the one.
I rarely have to say anything these days, but I'm also an assistant chief now, so it's a little bit of a different role. And I will say I never felt more my gender than I do now being in this role.
Talk
Um,
about that.
it was okay for me to be a sergeant, like it's not threatening, and I'm not making a bunch of decisions that could affect the entirety of the organization. And I'm not really having a huge impact on day-to-day operations that is visual, right? Because
Mhm.
I did have an impact on the day-to-day operations of the office, but not necessarily on the organization. And now that I'm in rooms where I'm making decisions for this entire organization, and I'm in spaces with other men who make decisions for their organization, it's I feel I feel the I feel my femaleness, I guess. I feel the disparity. I can tell like I'm being mansplained, or I can tell that my voice isn't as loud and being heard, or I can say something and not really get the same feedback as a male who said the exact same thing as me. And I am in a position where, you know, being the highest ranking Black female in the state, I'm in a lot of spaces where there's not a lot of women, there's not a lot of Black people. So here I am with both identities. So it does, I stand out and I feel it. I feel it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of a chief that I know who, she was the first woman on SWAT, the first to do a lot of different things in our police department. But she hated the conversation about women in policing. She just did not, she was like, why are we talking about it? I can compete with the fellas. We don't need to talk about that stuff, right? And then when she became a chief, probably about a year into her being a chief, she came to me and she goes, I know that they're doing certain things to me just because I'm a woman, like just because. And it was interesting to kind of see her evolution to say, like, no, I don't want to focus on that fact. Like, I just would like to do my job. But because it's an issue, what are we going to do about it? We got to talk about it. And so, I think that's kind of also just kind of part of, 30 by 30. And how do we talk about this? How do we address it? How do we stand firm in, yes, like I am qualified to do the job. I'm only going to talk about the fact that I'm a woman because maybe you think I'm not, simply because of that fact. And we talked about this in our prep around the statistics, right? Where women shoot less, women are sued less. They have sometimes a calming effect on their partner. I probably would not have a calming effect on my partner, but we have those statistics, and you ask the question, so if that's the case, then why do we have, the issues with folks, supporting and taking on 30 by 30 full on? What are some of your thoughts on that?
So I'm gonna put my Noble chapter on blast. I'm the president of the Minnesota Noble chapter for Minnesota. And we were at a meeting, and so Noble is a national organization of Black leadership executives, or law enforcement executives.
Law enforcement.
Let me get the acronym right. So
It's law enforcement.
So National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. And so it's usually lieutenants and higher that are part of Noble. And we were having a conversation about 30 by 30. And, I would proudly say that my department is 31% women right now. And that is intentional, right? And I heard a lot of the men say things like, oh, I'm not going to get on board with all these, schemes or marketing things, and trying to say they would rather not be a part of an organization that is encouraging 30 by 30, and because they don't like the image of it, they want to just hire qualified candidates. And that's the problem. That's the problem I see for women and minorities. Like, when we start stepping into these historically male roles, people automatically suggest that the qualifiers were changed for us, that that we weren't held to the same standard. And I will tell you, I don't know what other police departments, police academies are like, but Minneapolis's was rigorous, and I didn't get any special treatment. And I might have even wanted some, but I went through the same standards as everyone went through. And so I think part of the issue with getting the qualified candidate, which studies have shown are women, into the profession of law enforcement, is branding and marketing. Law enforcement, think of nursing. Nursing's marketing it as a helper, as you're helping someone. Think of teaching. It's marketing as, again, a helper. You're teaching someone, you're saving them, you're helping them. Law enforcement is marketed as protectors, and it's a different marketing, when in all actuality, the community is crying for a helper, someone to keep you safe. And so when we start actually marketing law enforcement for what it is, I think more women will gravitate towards this career, like nursing, like teaching, where there's a high number of women who are in that profession. But right now we're not marketing it like that. And there is a place for all the tactics and the, all the hands-on defensive tactics, the shooting and all that. I mean, we live in a society that is violent and does require that type of response, but 80%, and I'm just guessing, don't quote me, of at least my career when I was on patrol was about communication and interacting and keeping someone safe, So it wasn't the tactics and how the profession's actually marketed. It's marketed incorrectly, because that's not what you're really doing out there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I've heard that Deirdre entered the house somewhere out there. Deirdre is the producer of the film. We're so happy to have you here, Deirdre, and be part of our team. Look, me and Allison together. Can you believe it?
Hey, Dee.
So let's talk about the film, the reaction that you've gotten to the film, both then and now. Any lessons learned? Talk to us a little bit about that feedback you've gotten.
I've gotten quite a bit of attention from the film, and I wasn't the only person in the film, but I think people gravitated towards hearing my story, because I really allowed for Deirdre and as a producer to get really close to my family and to me at work. And I think being kind of an anomaly of being a Black woman in law enforcement and in Minneapolis, I think that was very intriguing to people. And then also that I grew up there. I think it helped people see how women can be in law enforcement. And I'm not the only one who interacts with the community how I do. I think I just had an opportunity to spotlight how I've done my career in law enforcement. And I always like to say that because people say, oh, I don't like police, but I like you, Alice. Well, there's a lot of Alice's, you just haven't met them yet. And I think the film, I'm proud of it. I was especially proud of my young daughter who, you know, stood her ground when we came back and filmed again surrounding George Floyd's murder and the civil unrest that occurred in Minneapolis. And I think it was a really good experience. At times it was hard having a film crew follow you around. And I know there was times where I was like, I'm not filming today, Deirdre, even though they flew from New York. But I think it was great to highlight women in law enforcement. And I think that I've had a lot of interviews surrounding the film, and I think it's been my pleasure to be able to show girls, especially girls that look like me, like this is what you can do. I mean, I was a teenage mom. I was on public assistance. I put myself through school, and now I've moved up in the ranks in a state that is 14% Black.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned your interview, so the film came out and it was around COVID, right? And so we did a lot of interviews and webinars like this online. And I remember reaching out to women that I know, one that you have come to meet, I think Shantae Boston Smith, who was in Milwaukee and is now in Sun Valley. Y'all in all the valleys, Golden Valley, Sun Valley, all the valleys. She felt very alone, very isolated. And she had no idea that there were women in other departments struggling like her. And so, she never went to Major City Chiefs, IACP. She was like just there, just struggling by herself. And it was from having, her own webinars that she now has a family of women in law enforcement across the country that, like support her. And it did my heart good for us to be in the same space. I think it was Nolly maybe or something. I can't remember when we were together. But so Deirdre, thank you for that. Thank you for your foresight. And there's a question from the audience. I don't know if you were on, but we were talking about the roll call scene. Were you on talking about that?
Yes.
Okay. They want to know, what did you think about that? I guess as you were filming.
I think I had a lot of mixed feelings about it because on the one hand, I thought Alice, Sergeant White is the most extraordinary person and you should be, really, really respecting her. So I thought they were a little jokey. But on the other hand, I really understood Alice's position. It's just very, very complicated to be there, to be one of the only Black women, only Black women sergeants. She had just started the job, and I knew that department. I knew that department was not always that great with women. I mean, so I think I felt both empathetic and also a little upset.
I mean, I think that's a good thing about the film. I don't know about being, a filmmaker, but you want those emotions to come out. And I have to say that throughout the film, I was on an emotional roller coaster. There's certain, and Deirdre, you saw this, there's certain parts of the film that I couldn't even talk about without choking up. Because it just goes directly to so many people's experience. And when you take on the fact that if you're in law enforcement and you put on a vest every day, you are putting your life on the line every day for other people's family. Nope. For other people's families. And then you have to deal with bullshit inside. It's a lot. It is a lot. And I appreciate you doing the film, because the other thing that happened, it was what when I would say, hey, people, come watch this film, and it's about women in law enforcement, a lot of people just would go like, huh, I never thought about that. I never even thought about women and whether there's enough in policing. I didn't even know that was an issue. So just always want to thank you for creating the space and the conversation around these issues. I'm gonna come to the audience. So if y'all want to start, putting things in the chat, questions in the chat, or raise your hand. However, but like Mo said, I don't believe these conversations are worth the conversation unless other people's voices are at the table. So whether it's something y'all want to talk about, a question that you have, please feel free. And we see, am I still gonna say it right? Jamil is the only Black female sergeant in San Jose. It still feels weird for me to say that. It in 2024, well, shoot, we're already 2025 essentially. That is the case. Any advice, Alice, that you would give? You look back in your career, anything that you would have done differently, or advice that you would give to folks who are out there as the only one?
Yeah, I think women in law enforcement tend to treat other women in law enforcement sometimes worse than the guys. And so I think early on in my career, I don't think I treated women badly, but I also didn't pull any women along with me. And I didn't always, see like someone's looking at me as a goal for themselves. That was really early on when I was still an officer. I think like those new officers, when I was on patrol, I would have taken a little bit more time to make sure that they were good, because no one was checking on us. And I think I learned that more towards the end of my time as a sergeant in Minneapolis. I really was feeling like a protector of not only women, but also the Black law enforcement at Minneapolis. But yeah, I wish I would have learned that sooner. I think I would have had a different impact on the younger women in law enforcement.
I love that you bring that up, because in small circles and 30 by 30, usually with some wine in our hand, we're talking about the fact that this either the perception or where people have fought really hard to make it seem like the pie is only so big, and that like there's one slice for us, and that we all need to eat off of that one slice. And so whether it's conscious or not, we become almost like a survival, like there's one sergeant position for a woman and I gotta have it, and so we really want to focus on, making sure that no, that whole pie is for us to eat. But one of the things that we struggled with early on in 30 by 30, when we were doing these listening sessions around the country, the women were like, cool. Yes, we got to talk about these men. But can we talk about how we as women, they were like, some of the most vicious things that are happening to me are coming from my fellow women. I see you nodding your head. Has that been your experience? Talk to us about that. You might even had, an experience that has to do with 30 by 30, I think.
So I didn't necessarily have that experience when I was an officer on patrol or even a sergeant, but I heard of other women having that experience. And that's more so like, I'm like, oh, why didn't I speak up for them? Why didn't I, because I'm really assertive. And so I think a lot of officers are, but when it comes to your peers, I think it's a different, they're not as assertive. And I could have probably helped someone. I've heard the horror stories, and that was part of the reason why, like that roll call scene, I'm like, what if I would have had a woman in that roll call and I didn't protect her? You know, that would have been awful. My one experience though that really stood out, and this is how Tanya and I actually connected, because, you know, like I said, my department is 30% women, and I worked on that intentionally, and we have a lot of female presence in this department. And I had kind of moved away from 30 by 30 because of an experience I had. Um, I heard that 30 by 30 was using Deirdre's film, Women in Blue, at the IACP conference. And I was super excited because someone came up to me and they're like, I just saw you in a film. And I'm like, what? And I didn't know they were using Women in Blue, clips of it. And so I went to go meet the women of 30 by 30. And, you know, I just wanted to see if there was any insight I could offer by being in the film and being present at IACP. And it was at the end of a session, so there was a lot of people coming up and asking questions. And so I was just kind of standing around, you know, waiting to meet the women who were on the panel. And one of the women on the panel walks up to me. She doesn't say, hi, Alice. She doesn't say anything. She just says, why did you do that at roll call?
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to shrink. I was like devastated. I'm like, that's how I was being associated. Like, you don't know me. You saw this film, you saw a moment in time of my career, and the tone, she was so angry. I was so embarrassed. And that was my introduction to 30 by 30. Since then, I've grown and I've known that. And so I reached out to Tanya. That was one of the first things I had to tell her, because I had an animosity because I was treated badly.
Yeah.
But that's been a lot of women's experience interacting with other women in law enforcement. When we have an opportunity to pull each other up, we're not, for whatever reason. And so I'm really an advocate for that now. Any opportunity I get to host the Minnesota Women's Police Association, I'm hosting them next week. Anytime there's an opportunity to participate or pull the women officers in, that's my goal. Not because I'm trying to specifically single them out, but I am encouraging them to know that they have support when that might not have been there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've been talking to different women who run different women groups, and we've been talking about, it seems kind of off and too basic, but how do we support each other? What does that look like in action? And how we're supporting one another in this space. But then also, how are we pushing back on that narrative that creates this competitiveness that doesn't necessarily have to be there? I saw a question in the chat. So first of all, we're getting a lot of, good conversation about the first and folks supporting one another. But the question is, what advice would you give future female leaders that want to continue to advance?
The first thing would be to find someone, I think, who's doing what you want to do, and learn from their experience, and then figure out what are the minimum requirements to be in whatever position that you want, and then master all of those requirements. A lot of the time, women tend to, have to outdo other candidates strictly because of our gender. And so I would say give them a reason to have to tell you no.
Ganesha, I just want to take a moment to read Brenda Goss Andrews' comment in the chat. You know, Brenda's the past president of National Noble and a big ally of ours. And Alice, she just thinks the world of you. But Brenda says, I saw the documentary, but I feel I need to look at it again. This is an excellent conversation. It reminds me of the things in my career as a police officer and later as a deputy chief with Detroit. I wasn't the first, but among the first working patrol in the streets, which was rough. And my experiences mirror Chief White's as she climbed the ladder. And you know, she's also doing some work on a study for African American women. So she's looking for some people with lived experience. I'll send an email about that later. But I wanted to acknowledge that, and then also like just some of the comments in here, Alice, like saying I was that person or I am that person. It's really like beautiful to see that, and that's exactly what we were hoping for as part of this conversation today.
I love it. Hi, Brenda.
Any questions out there? Anybody who wants to share their experience or even their advice? Asking the same question to women who are looking to advance. We know that departments are different across the country and the experiences that you have, but any questions or comments?
And feel free to take yourself off mute. It's totally fine at this point.
I know people ask me about the film and ask me where my daughter is. My daughter was in the film with me. And so she was in 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade when we started filming Women in Blue. And we had some really candid conversations, which I look back and I'm like, oh, she was so tiny. Well, she's 21 now.
Wow.
And she's a junior in college. And even she said, I need to go back and look at that film. Actually, I was supposed to reach out to Deirdre because she wants to do a paper on it for school.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
Yeah.
Alice, we did miss a question a little bit earlier on that was asking about how do you get into a specialized unit? And like what, you know, how is that different for women than for men, do you think?
So I think like the tactical units specifically tend to have male leadership. And from my experience, yeah, there's always some type of test to get in. And part of the test is, do I know you? Do I trust you? Are you my buddy? So to change that, we're going to need more women to want to get into those roles and hold rank in those roles and pull us along like the guys have done for each other. I know men have their whole testosterone thing that they do. It's a little bit different than what us ladies do, and we can be mean to each other when really we should really be uplifting each other and pulling each other along. So if you are interested in that role, you probably will be a first, and then just make sure you're not last. Like that's our obligation to each other.
The other thing that I've heard too is you know, people are always kind of looking for the plum role. So like depending on, you know, what you're doing in your what your agency looks like, or you might want to be a detective or homicide, but early on, take on those roles that may not be just the highest of prominence, right? To show, you know, your work ethic, to show not anything that's below you or anything like that, but I have heard from a lot of deputy chiefs and you and folks, other commanders, if y'all want to put it in the comments, if you feel the same way, where you're just kind of focused operations, instead of doing some of the administrative stuff or just those things that, like to Chief's point, where it's hard to deny you because you've got those skills, you've done what you needed to do. There's one question here. Hey, Alicia, what's funny, Chief White, is I sometimes text Alicia White thinking I'm texting you. And she's like, what are you talking about? So she says, can you speak on not just being at the table, but continuing to have your voice heard at the table and not just occupying a seat, but ensuring that your voice is being heard?
So I take on a lot of responsibilities and take lead on a lot of things that I feel passionate about because I want it to go how I want it to go. So I don't know if that's a question that you're asking, Alicia. But I feel like in order to have your voice heard, you have to just interject yourself. Sometimes I will repeat myself in a meeting and say the same thing multiple times, and then it'll come down to me having them decide, do I want to be right, or do I want the initiative I want to happen to actually happen? So sometimes it is conceding and instead of always having the ability to constantly just always have to be assertive. Sometimes you have to use your psychology skills and present things as a question, and kind of bring the conversation into the collective, so everyone feels like they were involved, even though it was you.
Chief, it's so interesting to hear you say that. We struggle with that in 30 by 30 all the time, and we've got this sort of framing that we use. Basically, you can either be exactly right or you can change things, right? Like you have to be willing to step away and meet people where they are to actually make progress.
I like that.
Yeah.
And it's hard, and sometimes it weighs on your spirit that you had to do it that way, but I guess it's the means to an end, and
Yeah.
ultimately we want the end.
Amen.
The other thing that I found is to create allies before you go into the room. So it's not obvious, right? And I learned this. There was a time at the Baltimore Police Department where some folks, some of which I helped get promoted and even hired, and at the time was fighting for them to get paid more. But anyway, they went to the commissioner and said that I talked too much in meetings. And I asked him if we could have a meeting and they could say those things to me. Turns out really they were mad because I'd have been in the newspaper and I didn't mention their name. And I said, if I didn't do it on purpose, I don't do this alone. I will mention your names all the time from this point forward. But one of the things that happened, that was a joke, but one of the things that happened was the commissioner started noticing I was speaking up less in meetings. So even though I kind of felt, I would, and he said, don't do that. And so because he turned himself into an ally, it helped me to start kind of thinking in that way. So if I ever have rooms, I'm going into rooms full of chiefs or something like that, I'll have one or two chiefs. Hey, this is what's happening. This is what I need you to support me on. And one of our male allies in this work, what does he often say? He had no idea. If you're not intentionally including, you're intentionally excluding. And so some of the times when I talk to my male counterparts, they didn't even conceive, they didn't see how people were talking over me or ignoring what I was saying. And so by educating them, they became an ally very quickly. So I would put that out there. I see some other questions coming through, but there is one from a Dr. Stephen W. who is mentioning asking someone to speak to the change in organizational culture and values in police departments over the past 20 years that better support the respect of men and women in the workplace. Some of the commentary suggests that things have not changed much for some departments versus others. So I don't know if Dr. Stephen, you want to speak about that. Maybe you have some research that you're underlying there. If not, I will say this. I will say that if we're looking at the comments, we have women who were saying they were the first in the 80s and the 90s, and how rough it was, and certainly that they have made it to very successful places in their career. So, but unfortunately, I think some of the struggles are still the same, even if they are mitigated in some other way. So,
I would say to Dr. Stephen that part of what I'm working on is the professionalism era of law enforcement. So I'm looking at corporations and how they treat their employees and pulling in some of those ideologies into my police department because I like how corporations operate for their employees, professional growth and intentional planning and succession. And so in law enforcement, we tended not to do that. And I think those are very important things that we can pull in from corporate America into the profession.
And I'd also just like sort of acknowledge where we are in this moment in history where a lot of the laws that needed to change have changed, right? Since a lot of women were navigating this stuff 40 years ago. But now the point of getting to the point of changing culture and changing those sort of intangible things is like nailing Jello to a wall. It's a little bit less easy to see the progress and sustain it and measure it and make sure that it's happening. And also just keep in mind 40% of the law enforcement agencies in this country don't have a single woman in them at all. Right. So we just don't know how far we have to go in some of those places. But we get emails all the time. Hey, I'm the first pregnant officer my agency's ever had. Do you have a pregnancy policy we can pull from? So I think it's important to celebrate progress, but there's definitely a long way to go.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to that, Mo, too, we also talk about like the health of an organization. We work with some organizations that women like, they're really treated well in the workplace. Everyone is treated well in terms of respect, in terms of fairness, all of these other things. And we kind of put them on one end of the healthy organization spectrum. And then we work with some agencies where it's the opposite. And we hear horror stories after horror stories. And some of those things just have not changed over the course of time. So and when we talk about 30 by 30, we note that, sometimes this work is not for all agencies. Like all agencies are not ready for women, and they're certainly not ready to, like, even if they bring them on, they're not ready to support them throughout the course of their career. So that's really something that we talk about in terms of the evolution and the transformation in policing. But we are about out of time, so I want to go ahead and wrap up. But I want to give Deidre, I don't know if you have something you'd like to say to everyone as the producer of this film, and we're so thankful for the work that you did with that. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Mo.
Just that, I knew the second I met Alice that she was an extraordinary person and that she would be an extraordinary part of the film. And I am so honored that you trusted me enough through that journey and that we have the film that we do. So thank you.
And thank you, Mo.
Well, thank you all so much for being here with us today. Huge thank you to Ganesha and Chief White. I think of all the webinars we've had, this is the most active the chat has been with people who really feel seen by the discussion that you all brought today. So thank you for being so open and honest. And Chief White, I do want to acknowledge and publicly apologize for what happened to you. It was hard to hear that happened, that someone associated from 30 by 30 was anything other than supportive. And I think it speaks a lot to sort of your strength and grace that you were willing to continue to have conversations with us and to be part of this, and hopefully we can keep working together in the future. So thank you for being you, and thank you for motivating people as well as you do. Really appreciate it. And Ganesha, as always, thank you so much for being such a wonderful moderator and bringing your whole self to it. We'll keep you all posted because it's sort of the end of the year. It's you'll see a little bit of a slowdown. I know we've got a lot of folks out, but we'll certainly keep you posted with what our next events are going to be. So if you don't receive our monthly newsletter, you can sign on to receive it directly on our website. Otherwise, your 30 by 30 point of contact in your agency will get all that information. But it was great to see so many folks on this webinar today, especially. So thanks for spending some time with us.